This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in the United States of America for the Quad Summit. The heads of India, US, Japan, and Australia will have a formal meeting to discuss issues like security, among other things.
Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington, D.C. ahead of his UN address and the Quad meet. Upon his arrival at the airport, he was received by the Department of State officials and India's ambassador to the United States.
These coming days will be packed with multiple engagements, meetings, and an address at the UNGA.
This is the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic that the Quad Summit is being hosted in person. Not to forget, this is also the first time PM Modi and US President Joe Biden are meeting each other. Given the friendly equation that Modi had with former US President Donald Trump, all eyes will be on the Modi-Biden equation.
My friend, India's friend, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump.
To every citizen across this nation, America loves India, America respects India, and America will always be faithful and loyal friends to the Indian people.
There is a lot for the two leaders to talk about, from trade to geopolitics. Coming up on the show, why is this one of Prime Minister Modi's most important foreign visits? It's Friday, September 24th, and you are listening to the Morning Brief. I'm Nehal Chaliawala. Foreign visits of state heads are a big affair. Behind the scenes, bureaucrats work for months to make a 3-day visit like this happen. And most of the agreements which are to be signed are ironed out much before the leaders even board their planes. So why spend so many resources on an in-person meeting when we know virtual meetings work just as fine? ET's Deputy Executive Editor Pranab Dhal Samanta, who has his 1 year to the power corridors of New Delhi and the other towards global geopolitics, explains why.
When you meet physically, you have an opportunity to do what they call informal chat. There is something called as the delegation level talks. So that's a very formal setting. That's across the table. Formal agendas are set out from before and you go through the motions. Then there is something known as a one-on-one. So one-on-one is a very private conversation. There are note takers. Those notes are never made public. And that's really where they talk a lot of the substance. And what's important is they talk frankly with each other. What is it that's troubling us? You need to understand this and we will understand this. That's where, people get to know each other. That's where the trust also gets built. And leaders, particularly political leaders, feel confident to take political calls.
Now, this is the first time when Prime Minister Modi and President Biden get a chance to have this informal chat. What kind of chemistry will they strike?
This is their first meeting. So first meeting is always exploratory. Sometimes you hit it out really well. Sometimes you don't. With Donald Trump, it probably struck more easily because the ideological persuasions of both sides were a little similar. Having said that, the thing with Biden is old institutional America. He has been a congressman for years, and he's been the vice president of this country. So he's an institutional man. What kind of relationship these two are able to build will actually be guided a lot by the institutional confines. That would be my guess, because despite what people say, Mr. Modi is also very conscious of his institutional role. And so both leaders will approach the relationship institutionally. And I guess as you move on, and if things improve, then you might have a better equation.
And a better equation between the US and Indian leadership is the need of the hour. The influence of China in the Asian theatre has been growing, and China has not particularly been friendly with India, or for that matter the US, Japan and Australia. In that context, Pranab, how important is the Quad Summit right now? And how central will be the discussion around China during the multilateral as well as the bilateral meetings this week?
There is a big China factor which has descended on everyone. India has had to face a tough situation on the borders.
हमने हमेशा से ही अपने पड़ोसियों के साथ एक कोऑपरेटिव और फ्रेंडली तरीके से मिलकर काम किया है। हमारे लिए भारत की अखंडता और संप्रभुता सर्वोच्च है और इसकी रक्षा करने से हमें कोई भी रोक नहीं सकता। इस बारे में किसी को भी जरा भी भ्रम या संदेह नहीं होना चाहिए।
In America, politics has turned, American business, etc., is also refitting itself to take on the China challenge. Many countries in the Indo-Pacific, like Australia, Japan, who have been facing the Chinese sort of threat, have articulated their positions more clearly. There is also a big debate going on around the origins of the virus, the coronavirus itself, and China's role in all of that, and the question of Chinese transparency. So in this entire backdrop, the first thing is the Quad Summit is hugely significant. Also, let me remind you that this was also the first virtual summit which President Biden did on taking over as president. So that's the significance the new United States president attaches to this project.
Beyond China, India and the US will also have a lot to discuss around Afghanistan. The decision to pull American troops out of the country was motivated by local politics in the US, but the execution was far from perfect.
Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland.
The Taliban overran Afghanistan even before the US could completely withdraw from the country, and the humanitarian crisis that ensued has taken the world by horror. Unsurprisingly, Joe Biden's popularity has also taken a hit.
It's kind of given Taliban a sense of victory, which is something the US as a society wouldn't accept. And also the images of people falling from planes and things like that have really dented his public image. So what was initially the American position on Taliban/Afghanistan, that let's talk, let's find an exit route, let's get out, that has now been taken over by what kind of a government we put over there. It should not be a government that sort of encourages terrorism. We should have a tight leash on it. We should ensure that they follow certain international benchmarks. In a way, many Indians, if you talk to them, the Indian officials, they feel that they're vindicated because they actually told the United States at many points in time that don't rush out or don't pull out like that. What next steps? There is a lot of convergence between India and the United States. Now, this convergence has to be built upon, okay? And that's important. And here, it's the free and frank conversation on Pakistan would be necessary because Pakistan and its intelligence agencies have been playing, for want of a better use of term, a double game. Also playing with the Chinese, with the Taliban, with the Americans. Somewhere, some kind of lines have to be drawn.
We are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas.
And if China is going to see this as part of its larger geopolitical project, then it kind of converges with the overall China picture, which India and US have been in conversation already with. So this meeting will help sort of join those dots together, and India can make its point on Pak-sponsored terrorism and why the role of ISI should be limited or at least controlled in charting out a future for Afghanistan.
The US has always needed Pakistan's help over the course of its war in Afghanistan. This often came between forming closer ties between India and the US. Now that the US has left Afghanistan, Where does the India-US-Pakistan play stand? And what does it mean for the geopolitics in the entire region?
India's role is kind of limited by geography. Geography favors Pakistan when it comes to Afghanistan. Afghanistan is dependent a lot on Pakistan for its, daily supplies. Just as simple as that, the basic trade which happens. Second, Pakistan does not allow India to use its territory as a transit to reach, say, Indian goods to Afghanistan. So the only way we can reach aid or help is either by air, which is limiting, or you go around by Pakistan altogether, go via Iran and then approach the Afghan border from the Iranian side, which is a longish route. Now, there you enter into the complication of US-Iran relationship. Then the other borders are from the Central Asian states, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. They are under the Russian sphere of influence. So you need to talk to Russia. So this is the geopolitical complication. So it's not just India and US finding points of convergence. It's about US also realizing that if it does not want to put its eggs in just the Pakistan basket, then what are the options we are looking at? So you'll have to talk to Iran. You'll have to find ways to talk to Central Asian countries, sort of give them options other than Russia. You got to play the larger geopolitical game together.
But Afghanistan is not the only burning geopolitical issue in the region. Australia, United States, and the United Kingdom last week announced a security alliance to counter China. It will be called AUKUS, AUKUS. Yes, it's a crummy acronym.
The United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia announcing a new security partnership. This week, it is aimed at strengthening Australia's military might as its relationship deteriorates further with China.
But a new nuclear-powered submarine pact between the UK, the US, and Australia has triggered a noisy reaction from China.
As part of the alliance, the US will sell nuclear submarines to Australia. Australia subsequently pulled out of a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal with France. The French are unhappy. But more importantly, political pundits feel that AUKUS will also undermine Quad, the alliance between India, US, and Australia and Japan. United States has ruled out adding India and Japan to the AUKUS, further fueling these speculations. Here's what a spokesperson from the Ministry of External Affairs had to say on the matter.
AUKUS is a security alliance between three countries. We are not party to this alliance. From our perspective, this is neither relevant to the Quad, nor will it have any impact on its functioning.
What's your assessment, Pranab?
I don't quite agree with the commentary which is going on as this undermined the Quad or something. In fact, all of them complement each other. The strategic underpinnings of the AUKUS deal far outweigh the diplomatic sort of commotion and this pact which is going on between France and the Australians. Please do understand that there are limitations on what Japan can do on the nuclear front because of its own domestic political concerns and its own history. Also understand India's own strategic ambiguity on several issues vis-a-vis US because India's strong defense relationship with Russia. India is also not an NPT member like Australia. So the Quad has to provide that strategic flexibility or cater for that strategic flexibility to each country while ensuring that the larger purpose is met. Now, within that larger umbrella, there is an umpteen number of possibilities which are there, like, for instance, the AUKUS. So go for it. If there is something which is a possibility between India, Japan, and say another third, like supply chain resilience initiatives which are being made, Japan is an active part of it. So what is possible within the Quad, do it. What is possible outside, do that. All of them complement each other to make sure you don't undermine each other, but move in tandem.
When PM Modi and President Biden meet, another political hot potato to handle will be the Kashmir issue and the farmers' protests in India. The American Senate and political heavyweight Bernie Sanders have criticized the Indian government on its handling of the Kashmir dispute.
We're encouraging the Indian government to move quickly so that people can live a normal life and not face these terrible burdens.
Where the Indian government has revoked Kashmiri autonomy, cracked down on dissent, and instituted a communications blackout.
I cannot foretell whether Mr. Biden will specifically raise this or that. But we must understand the institutional America and the rhetorical side of what happens and what people or sort of interest groups and pressure groups say. Being a democracy, they will be loud. There will also be Sikh groups out there who will agitate on the farmers' issues. There will be Kashmiri groups out there. How much does all of that percolate into institutional America? As long as it does not impact institutional relationships or what you are doing on the serious side of the ledger, it really doesn't matter beyond a point.
PM Modi today will also have bilateral meetings with the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. Both Australia and Japan are keen to look for business beyond China. And this is where India can pitch itself as a reliable partner.
I think bilaterally, a lot of the Japanese, Australians, they all are looking at India with great economic potential. So how do they get their private entities and businesses to look at India as a natural alternative to China? It will be very important.
India and the US can also greatly benefit by deepening their trade ties. China is US's biggest supplier. It is in the interest of both the US and India to increase trade between them. However, tariffs have been a big point of contention between both the countries. Despite all his camaraderie with PM Modi, former US President Donald Trump was quite vocal about India's tariff rates.
India, which is the tariff king, they called us and they say, we want to start negotiations immediately. When Bob Lighthizer said, what happened? You would never do this. They said, no, we want to keep your president happy. Isn't that nice?
See, tariff is a big issue. This is something India has to look at internally as well. I mean, whatever Trump would exaggerate it, etc. But we are a high tariff nation. And that also impedes our own economic growth. Having said that, we have to find ways of doing business without hurting our larger revenue picture. Also, there is the Atmanirbhar vision, which the Prime Minister has articulated. Now, every now and then he clarifies that Atmanirbhar does not mean that he's shutting the doors on others. He wants others to come and make in India. Now, those have to be translated into policies. I think at the end of it, particularly given the backdrop of coronavirus and its impact on global economy and national economies, what will be more in focus now will be what kind of special bilateral arrangements can be made for, say, American investment, Australian investment, or Japanese investment, or EU. Because there is also this thing that you have to protect your economy from China. In that respect, I think non-tariff issues like legal problems which people face here, things like that, will have to be addressed. Reversal of the retrospective tax is a big step in that direction. So, these kind of assurances is what people will look at. It's the environment conducive in India to do business or not. I think that's what people want.
In fact, to pitch India as a business hub, PM Modi met with the CEOs of 5 tech companies in the US yesterday. These include Adobe, General Atomics, Qualcomm, First Solar, and Blackstone. The Prime Minister will cap his US visit by addressing the United Nations General Assembly. He is expected to talk about issues like Taliban taking over the Afghanistan, climate change, and the need for a new world order post-COVID.
A new way of running the world after COVID is important because, you have to look at whether the UN system best represents the issue, the realities of today. can a 5-member UN Security Council be the only body in the world to have last say? So, you're talking about UN reforms of international bodies, be it World Bank, WHO. All these institutions have come under stress, and their shortcomings have once again been reflected. So many people do say that just like the Second World War was a turning point for you to look at these institutions, maybe COVID should be the turning point in which you should look at these institutional reforms, make it more representative, make it be countries like India, Brazil, South Africa. All these countries should have much larger say in decision making.
God bless you. May the force be with you.
In the past, PM Modi's foreign trips have often been criticized. Opposition alleged that India gained little from these trips, especially when judged by the foreign investment generated. But it's clear that these trips have had a positive impact on bilateral relations with any country that Modi visited. While Modi's bonhomie with Trump is well outlined, now, with President Joe Biden at the helm, Modi will again have to build a firm relationship with the US administration. Vice President Kamala Harris, whom Modi met yesterday, will play a pivotal role too, which bodes well for India. It's no surprise that Modi's first international trip during the pandemic is for the Quad Summit to the United States, and a positive trip will bode well for the years to come. That's all from us today. I'm Nehal Chiliawala, and you've been listening to The Morning Brief. This episode was edited by Shashwat Mohanty and produced by Soundarya Jayachandran. Swati Joshi was the sound editor. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please consider sharing it on your social media handles. Send us your feedback to themorningbrief@timesgroup.com. That's themorningbrief@timesgroup.com. The Morning Brief airs every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you for listening and have a nice day. Credits for all external clips used in this episode have been mentioned in the description.